The Viking Age is often reduced to horned helmets, burning monasteries, and men in fur charging out of longships to pillage. It's a fun image, but it's mostly wrong. The horned helmets are a 19th century invention, and while raiding is very real and very important to the story, the same Scandinavian sailors who raided also traded, farmed, explored, and settled lands as far away as North America and the Caspian Sea. Over about 300 years, a handful of chiefdoms on the edge of the known world reshaped the map of Europe and left a legacy still visible in language, law, and DNA. This is the entire history of the Viking Age. To understand why the Vikings show up so suddenly at the end of the 8th century, we have to look at Scandinavia before anyone called it that. This is a land of fjords, forests, and short-growing seasons. Farmland is limited, and what exists is often split between powerful families. Society is organized around small kingdoms and local assemblies called things, where free men gather to settle disputes and make decisions. At the top are jarls, wealthy landowners, and chieftains. Below them are carls, free farmers, and craftsmen who make up most of the population. And at the bottom are thralls, enslaved people captured in raids or born into servitude, who do much of the hard labor that keeps a farm or household running. Religion here is not centralized. There's no pope, no single sacred text, just a shared world of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, alongside a strong belief in fate and honor. A man's reputation and his family's is everything. But belief alone doesn't explain what's about to happen. Technology does. Scandinavian shipbuilders perfect the longship, a light, flexible, clinker-built vessel with a shallow draft. It can cross open ocean, but it can also sail up a river barely deeper than a bathtub. This is the medieval equivalent of an amphibious assault vehicle, and it gives Scandinavian raiders a level of mobility nobody in Western Europe can match. Add a few more ingredients. Population pressure at home, ambitious chieftains looking to prove themselves and win followers through plunder, and trade contacts already established with Frisia and the British Isles, giving Scandinavians a good idea of where the wealth is and how poorly defended it is. All of this comes together in 793. On the 8th of June 793, Viking raiders strike the monastery of Lindisfarne on the northeast coast of England. Monasteries are wealthy, full of silver and gold, and almost entirely undefended, since nobody in Western Europe expects an attack from the sea. The raid shocks the Christian world. A monk named Alcuin writes that never before has such terror appeared in Britain. It's not just violence, it's a sign that something has changed. The raids continue. Iona, a monastery off the coast of Scotland, is hit in 795, and again in 802 and 806. These early raids are hit and run. Small fleets appear without warning, grab what they can, and vanish before any army can respond. But over the following decades, these hit-and-run raids evolve into something much bigger: settlement. Norwegian Vikings push west and north into Scotland's Northern Isles, the Hebrides, and the Faroe Islands. Orkney and Shetland become Norse colonies in all but name, and they stay culturally Scandinavian for centuries. In Ireland, Norse raiders establish a fortified base at the mouth of the River Liffey in 841. That base becomes Dublin, one of the most important Viking towns in the west, and eventually a major hub of the slave trade. Irish kings fight the Norse constantly, but they also intermarry, trade, and even ally with them against rival Irish kingdoms. This is a pattern that repeats everywhere the Vikings go. It's rarely a simple story of invaders versus victims. England, though, is about to face something far bigger than a raiding party. In 865, a massive coalition of Scandinavian warbands lands in East Anglia. Later writers call it the Great Heathen Army. Unlike earlier raids, this force isn't here to grab silver and leave, it's here to conquer. Tradition holds that the army is led by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, avenging their father's death, though how much of that story is history and how much is saga is genuinely disputed. What isn't disputed is the result. Northumbria falls in 866, and its capital York becomes the Viking city of Jorvik. East Anglia falls next. Mercia is broken and partitioned. By 878, only one English kingdom stands. Wessex and its young king Alfred has just been driven into hiding in the marshes of Somerset. This is Alfred's lowest point and also the turning point. He regroups, rallies the men of Wessex, and crushes the Viking leader Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in 878. Instead of destroying Guthrum, Alfred offers peace on one condition: Guthrum converts to Christianity. The resulting treaty divides England along a rough line, with Alfred controlling the southwest and the Vikings controlling a region that becomes known as the Danelaw. Alfred earns the title the Great not for conquering the Vikings, but for surviving them, and for kickstarting a slow English reconquest that his descendants finish. By 927, his grandson Athelstan controls the whole of England, uniting Anglo-Saxon and Danelaw territory into a single kingdom for the first time. But the Danelaw leaves a permanent mark. Hundreds of English place names ending in by and thorpe are Norse in origin, and everyday English words like sky, window, law, and even they and them come from Old Norse. England's story with the Vikings is far from over, but for now, let's cross the channel. Francia is an even richer target than England, and the Vikings know it. Raiding parties sail up the Seine and the Loire, striking deep inland. Paris itself is attacked repeatedly, including a famous raid in 845 that, according to legend, is only called off after the Frankish king pays a massive ransom in silver. Whether or not every detail of that story is accurate, the broader pattern is real. Frankish kings, weak and divided after the breakup of Charlemagne's empire, find it easier and cheaper to pay off Viking fleets than fight them. This, unsurprisingly, only encourages more raids. In 885, a huge Viking fleet besieges Paris itself for almost a year. The city holds thanks to a determined defense led by a count named Odo, but the message is clear. The Franks need a permanent solution. That solution arrives in 911. A Viking leader named Rollo has been raiding and settling in the lower Seine Valley for years. Rather than fight him indefinitely, the French king, Charles the Simple, offers Rollo a deal, land around the mouth of the Seine, in exchange for loyalty, protection of the coast, and conversion to Christianity. Rollo accepts. The territory becomes the Duchy of Normandy, named after the Northmen who settled it. Within a few generations, Rollo's descendants speak French, fight as French knights, and consider themselves thoroughly Norman. One of those descendants, William, is going to become very important to this story later. While all this unfolds in England and Francia, other Vikings are sailing in the opposite direction entirely, west into open ocean, toward lands nobody in Europe knew existed. Norwegian Vikings, already established in the Scottish Isles, push further into the North Atlantic. Iceland is settled beginning around 874, when a chieftain named Ingolfr Arnason builds a farmstead near what becomes Reykjavik. Within 60 years, Iceland has enough independent farmers and chieftains that they establish the Althing in 930, an annual outdoor assembly where laws are made and disputes settled. It's often called the oldest parliament in the world, and it runs without a king, entirely through consensus among free landholders. From Iceland, the Vikings keep pushing. Around 985, a hot-tempered exile named Eric the Red, banished from Iceland after a killing, sails further west and finds a huge, mostly uninhabited landmass. He names it Greenland on the theory, apparently correct, that a good name attracts settlers. It works. Norse farming communities take root along Greenland's southern coast and survive for centuries. And Eric's son, Leif Erikson, pushes the exploration even further. Around the year 1000, Leif sails west from Greenland and reaches a forested coastline he calls Vinland. Archaeological remains at Lance O Meadows in Newfoundland confirm it. Norse Vikings reached North America roughly 500 years before Columbus. They don't stay. Conflict with the local peoples they call Skraelings and the sheer distance from any support make permanent settlement impossible. But for a brief moment, a Viking farmstead exists on the shores of a continent Europe doesn't know is there. That's the western half of the story. But there's an entire other direction the Vikings sail, and it's just as important, east. While Norwegians and Danes look west, Swedish Vikings, often called the Rus, look east into the river systems of what is now Russia and Ukraine. This isn't primarily a story of raiding. It's a story of trade. Swedish merchants and warriors push down rivers like the Volkhov and the Dnieper, carrying furs, amber, and enslaved captives south in exchange for silver, silk, and spices, flowing up from the Islamic world and Byzantium. According to the Russian Primary Chronicle, a semi-legendary Norse chieftain named Rurik is invited by feuding Slavic and Finnic tribes to rule over them and bring order, settling at Novgorod around 862. Whatever the exact truth behind that story, Rurik's successor, Oleg, moves the center of power south to Kiev in 882, founding what becomes known as Kievan Rus. The very name Russia likely derives from Rus, the Norse settlers who founded it, one of the clearest fingerprints the Vikings leave on world history. The Rus don't just trade, they raid too, and their biggest target is the ultimate prize of the medieval world, Constantinople. Rus fleets attack the Byzantine capital in 860, 907, and 941. They rarely succeed in taking the city, its walls and Greek fire see to that. But the raids force the Byzantines to negotiate favorable trade agreements instead. Eventually, the relationship flips from hostility to partnership. Byzantine emperors recruit Scandinavian warriors as an elite personal bodyguard, the Varangian Guard, famous for their loyalty, their battle axes, and their willingness to fight for the highest bidder. One future king of Norway, Harald Hardrada, spends years serving in the Varangian Guard, fighting from Sicily to the Middle East before returning north to claim a throne, and we'll meet him again very soon. So by the 10th century, Scandinavian sailors and settlers stretched from Newfoundland to Baghdad. But back home, Scandinavia itself is changing just as fast. For the first 2 centuries of the Viking Age, Scandinavia itself remains a patchwork of small competing kingdoms, but that starts to change. In Denmark, King Harald Bluetooth unites the country under a single crown, and around 965 converts to Christianity, raising a massive stone monument at Jelling to declare that he made the Danes Christian. It's a political move as much as a spiritual one. Christianity connects Harald to the wider network of European kings, gives him access to literate clergy who can help run an administration, and undercuts local chieftains whose power rested partly on pagan tradition. In Norway, kings like Olaf Tryggvason and later Olaf Haraldsson, remembered as Saint Olaf, push Christianity hard, sometimes through genuine conversion, sometimes at the point of a sword. Sweden converts more slowly and holds on to pagan worship at sites like Uppsala the longest. But by the 11th century, the old gods are fading across Scandinavia, and the Viking homelands look increasingly like the rest of Christian Europe, with kings, bishops, and centralized law. This new, more organized Scandinavia produces one of the most remarkable rulers of the entire period, Knut. Knut is the son of a Danish king who conquers England outright in 1016, becoming its king. 2 years later, he inherits the throne of Denmark too. By 1028, he's added Norway to his titles as well. For a brief moment, one man rules a North Sea empire, stretching from the English Channel to the Arctic Circle, holding it together not through Viking raiding, but through careful diplomacy, marriage alliances, and respect for local law and custom in each kingdom. It's a strange kind of peak for the Viking Age, a Scandinavian king who succeeds not by burning things down, but by governing well. But Knut's empire doesn't outlive him. When he dies in 1035, his sons squabble over the inheritance, and the North Sea Empire falls apart within a decade. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, the long relationship between Norse settlers and Irish kings comes to a dramatic head. By the early 11th century, the Vikings of Dublin are thoroughly tangled up in Irish politics, allying with some Irish kings against others, and being just as likely to fight alongside the Irish as against them. In 1014, the powerful Irish High King, Brian Boru, faces a coalition of the King of Leinster and Viking forces from Dublin and beyond at the Battle of Clontarf. Brian's forces win a hard-fought victory, but Brian himself is killed in his tent after the battle, reportedly by a fleeing Viking warrior. Clontarf doesn't end the Viking presence in Ireland. Dublin remains a Norse-Irish trading town for a long time afterward. But it does mark the end of any serious Viking ambition to dominate Ireland as conquerors, rather than as one power among many. By now, if you're keeping track, the Viking Age has produced kingdoms in England, Ireland, and Normandy, colonies in Iceland and Greenland, a footprint in North America, a state that becomes Russia, and mercenaries guarding the Byzantine emperor. It's a lot to compress into one video, and honestly, we've only hit the highlights, but all of this is about to converge on a single extraordinary year. It's 1066. In England, King Edward the Confessor has died without a clear heir, and the English nobleman Harold Godwinson has taken the throne. 2 rival claimants disagree. One is William, Duke of Normandy, descendant of the Viking Rollo, who claims Edward promised him the crown. The other is Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, the former Varangian guardsman, who claims an old agreement gives him a right to England as well. Harald Hardrada strikes first, landing in the north of England with a huge fleet. Harold Godwinson marches his army north at breakneck speed and crushes the Norwegian invasion at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Harald Hardrada is killed, and his death is often treated as symbolic, the end of the age of Viking kings, trying to carve out new territory through conquest by force. But Harold Godwinson barely has time to celebrate. Just days later, word arrives that William of Normandy has landed in the south. Harold marches his exhausted army all the way back down England and meets William at Hastings. Harold is killed, and William, a descendant of Viking settlers who had become thoroughly French, conquers England as its new Norman king. There's something fitting about that ending. The Viking Age closes not with the last Viking being defeated by some purely native English force, but with one branch of the Viking world, the Normans, absorbing another branch's ambitions in England for good. The raiders had become kings, the kings had become dukes, and the dukes now become the ruling class of England itself. Historians generally use 1066 as the rough closing date of the Viking Age. Though of course no one in Scandinavia woke up on New Year's Day and stopped being a Viking. Scandinavian kingdoms simply finished the process they'd already started, becoming centralized Christian feudal states that look more and more like the rest of medieval Europe. Norway, Denmark, and Sweden settle into recognizable national identities. Iceland keeps its Althing running for centuries. Greenland's Norse colonies linger until the 15th century before mysteriously dying out, likely from a worsening climate and dwindling trade contact. And the Rus principalities in the east gradually blend into Slavic culture, keeping the name Rus long after the language and customs became thoroughly Slavic rather than Scandinavian. So what's the legacy of 3 centuries of raiding, trading, and settling? It's bigger than most people realize. The English language carries hundreds of Norse loanwords sitting right alongside its Anglo-Saxon and French vocabulary. Place names across England, Scotland, Ireland, and Normandy still echo Old Norse origins. Iceland's sagas preserve some of the richest literature to survive from the medieval world, part history, part legend, almost entirely gripping. Archaeological finds like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships show off just how advanced Viking shipbuilding really was, and modern genetic studies keep confirming just how far Scandinavian settlers actually traveled and how thoroughly they mixed with the populations they encountered, rather than simply conquering and moving on. The Vikings weren't a single unified nation with one goal. They were farmers looking for better land, merchants chasing silver, exiles seeking a second chance, and warlords hunting glory, all sailing out from a handful of Scandinavian fjords because a new kind of ship let them go further, faster than anyone in Europe thought possible. By the time the Viking Age ends, they've founded a country, reshaped 3 others, discovered a continent, and guarded an empire. Not bad for a bunch of raiders in longships.